Casualty. By Seamus Heaney. He would drink by himself. And raise a weathered thumb. Towards the high shelf. Calling another rum. And blackcurrant, without. Having to raise his voice. Or order a quick stout. By a lifting of the eyes. And a discreet dumb show. Of pulling off the top. At closing time would go. In waders and peaked cap. Into the showery dark. A dole-kept breadwinner. But a natural for work. I loved his whole manner. Sure-footed but too sly. His deadpan sidling tact. His fisherman's quick eye. And turned observant back. Incomprehensible. To him, my other life. Sometimes, on the high stool. Too busy with his knife. At a tobacco plug. And not meeting my eye. In the pause after a slug. He mentioned poetry. We would be on our own. And, always politic. And shy of condescension. I would manage by some trick. To switch the talk to eels. Or lore of the horse and cart. Or the provisionals. But my tentative art. His turned back watches too. He was blount bits. Out drinking in a curfew. Others obeyed, 3 nights. After they shot dead. The 13 men in Derry. Pastthirten, the walls said. Bogside nil, that Wednesday. Everyone held his breath and trembled, too. It was a day of cold. Rossilence, wind blown. Surplice and soutane. Rained on, flower laden. Coffin after coffin. Seemed to float from the door. Of the packed cathedral. Like blossoms on slow water. The common funeral. Unrolled its swaddling band. Lapping, tightening. Till we were braced and bound. Like brothers in a ring. But he would not be held. At home be a sound crowd. Whatever threats were phoned. Whatever black flags waved. I see him as he turned. In that bomb-defending place. Remorse fused with terror. In his still knowable face. His cornered out-faced stare. Blinding in the flash. He had gone miles away. For he drank like a fish. Nightly, naturally. Swimming towards the lure. Of warm lit-up places. The blurred mesh and murmur. Drifting among glasses. In the gregarious smoke. How culpable was he? That last night when he broke our tribe's complicity. Now, you're supposed to be an educated man. I hear him say, puzzle me. The right answer to that one. 3. I missed his funeral. Those quiet walkers. And sideways talkers. Shoaling out of his lane. To the respectable. Purring of the hearse. They move in equal pace. With the habitual. Slow consolation. Of a dawdling engine. The line lifted, hand. Over fist, cold sunshine. Once water, the land. Banked under fog, that morning. I was taken in his boat. The screw curling, turning. Indolent fathoms white. I tasted freedom with him. To get out early, haul. Steadily off the bottom. Dispraise the catch, and smile. As you find a rhythm. Working you, slow mile by mile. Into your proper haunt. Somewhere, well out, beyond. Dawn sniffing revenant. Plotter through midnight rain. Question me again. Summary. Casualty, by Seamus Heaney is a 3-part poem that is made up of stanzas of different lengths. The 3 parts were divided up by the poet with Roman numerals in the original text. There is no single pattern of rhyme or rhythm in this text, but that doesn't mean that it lacks unity. The sections, although made up of different length stanzas, contain around the same number of lines. Heaney also makes use of rhyme at the end of lines, full and slant. This poem is deeply emotional. It speaks on a traumatic, history-defining event, the day in Irish history known as Bloody Sunday. This day, the 30th of January 1972, is remembered for the murder of unarmed civilians during a protest march. Those injured were all Catholic and the march had been organized by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. 14 in total would die. Those involved in the slaughter were British soldiers and they shot people fleeing, and even those trying to help the wounded. the same battalion of soldiers, and been involved in 2 other controversial shoots in the previous months. It was not until 2010 that the killings were officially labeled as unjustified, and that the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, made a formal apology. In the first lines of Casualty, the speaker begins by referring to a man. Although the man is not named within the text, he is known to be an Irishman named Lewis O'Neill. The speaker describes him, at first, through his drinking habits. He often spent time by himself drinking and calling for another run with his weathered thumb. From these lines, the reader can infer that he is old and is a longtime customer of one particular establishment. This is further emphasized by the fact that O'Neill did not have to raise his voice to get another drink. Anyone working in the bar knew exactly what he wanted. In another instance, the speaker describes how O'Neill is able to justify the lift of his eyes, order a quick stout. Heaney continues on, describing how after the man was done drinking he would leave the bar wearing waters and a peaked cap. Often when he left the bar it would be dark, and he would be forced to contend with a shower of rain. The speaker emphasizes how the man was weathered, a natural for work, and someone who got financial help or a dole from the government. After making the statements about O'Neill's personality and evening habits, Heaney states that he loved O'Neill's whole manner. In the last lines of the stanza, he adds a few more details about this manner and what he found appealing about it. He thought of O'Neill as sure-footed but sly. He also had a way of not calling attention to himself, and even when his back was turned he was observant. Through a single stanza, Heaney is able to paint a clear picture of who this man was. This is important, for as the poem continues a reader's empathy for the character involved is of the utmost importance. As is the realism with which Heaney speaks on O'Neill and the events surrounding him. In these lines, Heaney is referring to the way that O'Neill pressed his chewing tobacco as into a square, brick-like shape. Rather than spending time talking about this part of his life that the man didn't understand, Heaney does his best to quietly and politely change the topic to something more common. He mentions eels, the horse and cart, or the provisionals, as examples. The last statement is a reference to one group of the IRA army. The provisionals, compared with the officials, were the dominant grouping of members. In the second section of the poem, the speaker describes the imagery on the day of the funeral for those killed on Bloody Sunday. It was cold, wind-blown, and filled with a raw silence. 1. Powerful images of the surplice and soutane, or the loose garments worn by the priest. These were moving in the wind. The rhythm in these lines is very exacting in order to reference the regularity of the funeral service. In the second stanza of the section, the speaker describes how O'Neill disobeyed curfew. There was no way that his family could hold him back. It didn't matter what kind of threats were called in or what kind of black flags waved. The speaker then spends the next lines of Casualty, describing how he saw O'Neill in that bomb-offending place. On the man's face he observed remorse and terror. These were present while he was still knowable or alive. His face was blinded in the flash of the bombing. In the third stanza of the second section, Heaney emphasizes the lengths the man would go to find something to drink. If it had not been for his habit he would not have disobeyed the curfew. He was like a fish who naturally and instinctually swim towards the lit-up places. He was attracted to the glasses in the gregarious smoke. The next lines of Casualty are used to speak on whether or not it should be considered O'Neill's fault that he died. The poet isn't sure how he should think about this, and at the moment he thinks back to a conversation he had with her O'Neill before he died. He quotes the man saying, "Now, you're supposed to be an educated man. Ellipsis dot. The right answer to that one." Just as the engine of the car was dawdling, the engine of the boat was purling in indolent fathoms white. In those moments that he was fishing with his friend, he tasted freedom with him. The simple pleasure in getting out early and falling into a rhythm brought Heaney to a different but similar king of meditative state. The miles go by, and as he recalls the experience he dwells on distance and the unknowable future and past. O'Neill is the intended listener of the final lines of Casualty. Heaney describes him as dawn-sniffing revenant and plotter, or someone moving slowly, as O'Neill did, through midnight rain. He was the best and worst of his own attributes. The last line asks the man, now revenant, to question him again, as he did when the two would drink together. Works cited. https://pomanalysis.com/Seamus-Heaney/Casualty/